At her corporate party, my wife mocked me. Her boss slipped me a card and whispered, "Call me if you want a woman who values you." My wife's face when she saw her hand on my shoulder, unforgettable. What happened that night at the pharmaceutical gala changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my own worth. I'd been running a successful logistics optimization firm for 8 years, building it from nothing into something that generated solid 7-figure revenue, but apparently that wasn't impressive enough for Emma's research colleagues at the downtown Chicago awards ceremony. I watched her transform the moment we walked into that upscale ballroom, her entire demeanor shifting as she spotted her team gathered around the bar in their designer cocktail attire. "Oh, there's my research group," she said, practically bouncing with excitement, then turned to me with this forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just try to blend in tonight, okay? These people are really accomplished." I should have recognized the warning signs right there, but I was still naive enough to think she meant it supportively. The first red flag came when she introduced me to Dr. Peterson, the lead researcher on her project. "This is Jason, just my husband," she said with a dismissive wave, then immediately launched into an elaborate explanation of Peterson's groundbreaking work on protein synthesis inhibitors. Just my husband. Like I was some accessory she'd brought along reluctantly. When Peterson politely asked about my work, Emma actually interrupted before I could answer. "Oh, Jason does logistics stuff. Nothing too exciting. Dr. Peterson, tell him about your presentation at the Geneva conference last month." I felt my face flush with embarrassment as Peterson gave me one of those awkward, sympathetic nods people reserve for uncomfortable social situations. The pattern repeated itself throughout the evening, with every introduction becoming more humiliating than the last. "This is Dr. Martinez, she's revolutionizing cancer treatment protocols. And this is my husband." The contrast was always stark, elaborate professional praise for everyone else, dismissive afterthoughts for me. I found myself relegated to fetching drinks and standing silently while Emma held court about laboratory achievements I couldn't contribute to, despite my expertise in supply chain management being directly relevant to pharmaceutical distribution challenges they were discussing. The breaking point came when her colleague Dr. Williams mentioned struggling with inventory management issues at their manufacturing facility. I started to offer insights about optimization strategies I'd implemented for similar clients, but Emma cut me off mid-sentence. "Jason, could you get me another white wine? The Sauvignon Blanc, not the Chardonnay." She literally turned her back on me to continue the conversation, leaving me standing there like hired help while discussing problems I could have solved in my sleep. Dr. Williams looked genuinely uncomfortable, glancing between Emma and me with obvious confusion about why she'd shut down potentially valuable input. I walked to the bar feeling smaller than I had in years, ordering her wine while overhearing fragments of conversations about my wife's brilliant research contributions and wondering when I'd become so insignificant in her eyes that she couldn't even let me speak professionally. The bartender, a guy probably 10 years younger than me, gave me this knowing look as he poured the Sauvignon Blanc. "Rough night?" he asked quietly. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing how humiliated I felt. When I returned with Emma's drink, she was deep in animated discussion about grant funding strategies, her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm I hadn't seen directed at anything involving me in months. She took the wine without acknowledgement, not even breaking eye contact with her colleagues, and I realized I was watching my wife in her element, an element that apparently had no room for me as anything more than a convenient accessory. Other guests were definitely noticing the dynamic by then, shooting me sympathetic glances and including me in conversations Emma kept steering away from my areas of expertise, but their pity only made the situation more mortifying. That's when Dr. Victoria Kane made her entrance, and I immediately understood why Emma had been so nervous about tonight. Victoria commanded attention the moment she walked into our group, her presence filling the space like she owned not just the room but the entire building, which technically she did as the newly appointed vice president of operations. She was probably early 40s, impeccably dressed in a way that screamed executive confidence, and she moved through the crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who'd never doubted her place in any room. Emma's entire body language shifted the instant Victoria approached, her forced casual demeanor becoming noticeably more rigid and deferential. Dr. Kane, Thank you so much for coming tonight, Emma said, her voice taking on this sickeningly sweet tone I'd never heard before. I hope you're enjoying the celebration. Victoria's smile was polite but calculating as her eyes swept over our little group, taking in the dynamics with the sharp assessment of someone accustomed to reading boardroom politics and power structures. It's a lovely event, Emma. I've been looking forward to meeting the people behind our research successes, she said, then her gaze landed directly on me with unexpected focus. And you must be Jason. Emma mentions you occasionally. The way she said, occasionally, carried subtle weight, like she'd noticed how infrequently Emma brought up her husband despite talking constantly about everyone else in her life. Emma's laugh came out forced and brittle. Yes, that's my husband. Jason does logistics work. But Victoria didn't dismiss me the way everyone else had tonight. Instead, she stepped closer, extending her hand with genuine interest. Logistics optimization, if I'm not mistaken? Emma mentioned you work with supply chain management for manufacturing companies. I was surprised Emma had mentioned my work at all, given tonight's performance, but I shook Victoria's hand and felt the firm grip of someone who took business seriously. That's right. I specialize in pharmaceutical and medical device distribution, actually. Lot of overlap with your industry. Emma's eyes widened slightly, probably realizing she'd never bothered to learn the specifics of what I actually did or which industries I served. Victoria's expression sharpened with genuine professional interest. Really? We've been struggling with some distribution inefficiencies in our Midwest operations. Our current logistics partner seems to be missing opportunities for optimization. I could feel Emma's discomfort radiating beside me as I launched into discussing inventory management strategies, just-in-time delivery systems, and cost reduction methodologies I'd implemented for other pharmaceutical clients. For the first time all evening, I was speaking about something I knew inside and out, and Victoria was listening with the focused attention of someone who understood the financial implications of what I was describing. Those are exactly the kinds of solutions we need, Victoria said, her tone carrying the authority of someone who made million-dollar decisions regularly. Your approach to minimizing waste while maintaining regulatory compliance sounds particularly relevant to our challenges. Emma tried to redirect the conversation back to her research, but Victoria kept asking me detailed questions about implementation timelines, cost projections, and measurable outcomes I'd achieved for previous clients. I found myself explaining complex optimization algorithms and efficiency metrics while Emma stood there looking increasingly uncomfortable with the professional attention I was receiving from her boss. Jason clearly knows his field, Victoria observed, glancing meaningfully at Emma. I'm curious why you've never mentioned his expertise in our operations meetings when we discuss logistics challenges. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Emma's face flushed as she scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't reveal she'd never really listened to or valued what I did professionally. I didn't want to seem like I was pushing my husband's business, she said weakly, which was laughable considering she'd spent the entire evening promoting everyone else's professional achievements. Victoria's smile became even more pointed. How thoughtful of you to be so modest about your husband's qualifications. The emphasis she placed on modest made it clear she'd recognized exactly what kind of dynamic she was witnessing, and Emma's discomfort was becoming visible to everyone in our circle. 20 minutes later, I found myself alone on the hotel's rooftop garden, needing air and space to process what had just happened with Victoria's pointed observations about Emma's treatment of me. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the glass barriers, and I was nursing a scotch while trying to understand how my marriage had deteriorated to the point where my own wife was embarrassed to acknowledge my professional accomplishments. I heard heels clicking on the stone pathway and turned to find Victoria approaching with 2 glasses of wine, her expression more serious than it had been downstairs. I hoped I might find you up here, she said, offering me one of the glasses. You looked like you needed some fresh air after that performance. I accepted the wine, unsure how to respond to her directness. Emma's just protective of her professional image. Big night for her department. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jason, I've been watching this dynamic for months through Emma's behavior patterns in the office. She talks about everyone in her life except you, mentions her colleagues' spouses constantly but never brings up her husband's achievements, and gets visibly uncomfortable when anyone asks about her home life. The observation hit me like a physical blow because it confirmed what I'd been sensing but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She talks about other people's spouses? Victoria nodded, settling into the chair across from me with the casual confidence of someone used to difficult conversations. Constantly. Dr. Peterson's husband's law practice, Dr. Martinez's wife's art gallery, even the lab technician's boyfriend's promotion at the bank. But when anyone asks about you, she changes the subject or gives vague non-answers. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized Emma had been systematically erasing me from her professional identity for months, maybe years. I noticed she interrupted you tonight when Dr. Williams mentioned inventory problems, Victoria continued. Those are exactly the issues costing our company hundreds of thousands annually, and you clearly had solutions, but she shut you down like you were some embarrassing relative at a family dinner. The accuracy of that comparison stung because it perfectly captured how Emma had made me feel, like someone to be managed and minimized rather than valued and supported. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, but not the standard corporate kind they'd been handing out downstairs. This was personal cardstock with her private number. I have a proposition for you, and I want you to consider it carefully. I took the card, noting the weight of the paper and the elegant simplicity of the design. What kind of proposition? Her eyes met mine directly, and I saw something there that had nothing to do with business networking. My company needs a logistics consultant who understands pharmaceutical distribution. The contract I'm offering would be worth more than your current annual income, and it would put you in direct partnership with executive leadership rather than middle management. The professional opportunity was impressive enough, but something in her tone suggested this was about more than just business optimization. And personally? I asked, surprising myself with my directness. Victoria smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her all evening. Personally, I find it refreshing to meet a man who's built something substantial without needing to diminish others to feel important. Your wife doesn't seem to appreciate that quality. The implication hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or ignore. Victoria, I'm married. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something more intimate. Are you though? Really? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a man who's been made to feel invisible in his own relationship. Her hand moved to rest lightly on my forearm. Successful women know how to appreciate successful men, Jason. We don't feel threatened by competence, we're attracted to it. I looked down at her manicured fingers against my jacket sleeve and felt a jolt of attraction I hadn't experienced in years. Not just physical, though Victoria was undeniably beautiful, but the intoxicating sensation of being seen and valued by someone who operated at the highest levels of achievement. My husband used to make me feel small about my ambitions, she continued quietly. Subtle comments about my work schedule, passive-aggressive remarks about my salary, constant undermining disguised as concern. I stayed too long because I thought loyalty mattered more than respect. Her words hit home with devastating accuracy because I recognized the same pattern in reverse, Emma's constant minimizing of my achievements, her embarrassment about my presence in her professional circles, her systematic exclusion of me from the identity she presented to her colleagues. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Victoria's thumb traced a small circle on my wrist. I'm suggesting that life is too short to spend it with someone who sees your success as a threat instead of an asset. The consulting contract is real and substantial, but I'd be lying if I said that's all I'm offering. Before I could respond, I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me and turned to see Emma standing at the garden entrance, her face pale with shock as she took in Victoria's hand on my arm and the intimate way we were sitting together. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, like she couldn't process what she was witnessing, and for the first time all evening, I saw genuine fear in her eyes as she realized her boss was offering me exactly what she'd been withholding: recognition, respect, and something that looked very much like desire. What happened next will probably be talked about in pharmaceutical industry circles for years, because Emma's jealousy didn't just reach a breaking point, it detonated like a controlled demolition of her entire career. She stormed across the rooftop garden with fury blazing in her eyes, her heels clicking against the stone like gunshots, and I knew immediately that whatever came out of her mouth was going to be catastrophic. "Get your hands off my husband," she snarled at Victoria, her voice carrying across the terrace loud enough to make other guests turn and stare. Victoria calmly removed her hand from my arm and stood with the measured grace of someone who'd handled boardroom confrontations with hostile shareholders, but Emma was already past the point of rational thinking. "This is completely inappropriate behavior from a senior executive," Emma continued, her voice rising to a pitch that was drawing a crowd of curious colleagues. "You're sexually harassing my husband at a company function, and I won't stand for it." The accusation hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled, and I watched Victoria's expression shift from surprise to calculating as she processed what Emma had just said in front of dozens of witnesses. "Emma," I said quietly, trying to defuse the situation before it became irreversible, but she whirled on me with venom I'd never seen before. "Don't you dare defend her, Jason. I saw how she was touching you, whispering in your ear like some desperate cougar prowling for younger men." The insult was so over the line that several people gasped audibly, and I realized Emma had just crossed into territory there was no coming back from. Victoria remained perfectly calm, her voice steady and professional as she addressed the growing crowd. "I think everyone here witnessed a business conversation between two professionals, nothing more." But Emma was beyond reason now, fueled by months of insecurity and the terror of watching her boss show interest in the husband she'd been systematically devaluing. "Business conversation? You had your hands all over him. This is sexual harassment, and I'm reporting it to HR first thing Monday morning." The crowd was getting bigger, with people pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a career-ending meltdown, and Emma seemed oblivious to the digital evidence being captured of her public breakdown. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp as she gestured toward the security cameras positioned around the terrace. "By all means, report whatever you feel is appropriate. I'm confident the footage will show exactly what transpired here tonight." The color drained from Emma's face as she realized she'd just accused a vice president of sexual harassment in front of witnesses and cameras that would contradict her version of events, but she was too deep in her rage to stop digging. "You think you can steal my husband because you have money and power? He's not interested in some desperate executive who has to prey on married men because she can't find anyone her own age." The personal attacks were getting uglier, and I could see people in the crowd exchanging looks of shock and secondhand embarrassment as Emma revealed exactly what kind of person she was beneath the professional facade. Dr. Peterson, who'd been one of her biggest supporters, was shaking his head with obvious disappointment, while Dr. Martinez had started backing away like she didn't want to be associated with the spectacle. "Emma, stop," I said firmly, but she was completely beyond reason now, pointing an accusing finger at Victoria while her voice carried across the rooftop. "Everyone needs to know what kind of predator we're working for. She's using her position to sexually harass employees' spouses." Victoria's response was delivered with the cold precision of someone who just watched an opponent commit professional suicide. "I think you should take some time to cool down before you say something else you'll regret, Dr. Hayes. Your behavior tonight has been recorded by multiple sources, and I suspect HR will be very interested in reviewing footage of a subordinate making false accusations against a superior in such a public forum." The implication was crystal clear. Emma had just destroyed her career in front of colleagues who would never look at her the same way again, and the video evidence would show exactly who had been inappropriate and who had remained professional throughout the encounter. Emma's face went from flushed with anger to ghostly pale as the magnitude of what she'd done began to sink in, but the damage was already done and spreading through social media as people posted clips of her meltdown with captions about workplace drama and career implosion. I watched my wife realize she'd just committed professional suicide while trying to protect a marriage she'd been systematically undermining, and the irony was so profound I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered how she'd spent the entire evening treating me like an embarrassing accessory she wished she could leave at home. The drive home was 45 minutes of Emma frantically making damage control calls while I sat in the passenger seat watching her professional life implode in real time through a series of increasingly desperate conversations. Her hands were shaking as she speed-dialed colleagues, HR representatives, and anyone else she thought might help salvage the wreckage of her career, but every conversation ended with the same defeated silence that told me her situation was hopeless. "Dr. Peterson, please, you know I'm not usually like this," she pleaded into the phone, her voice cracking with desperation. It was just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. I could hear Peterson's uncomfortable tone even from the passenger seat as he explained that multiple videos of her meltdown were already circulating on social media, and that several colleagues had expressed concerns about her professional judgment and emotional stability. Emma's face crumpled as she realized her reputation was being destroyed in real time by her own colleagues sharing footage of her public breakdown. The next call was to her department head, who informed her that she was being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into her conduct at the company event, and that she would need to meet with HR first thing Monday morning to provide her version of events. "Administrative leave?" Emma repeated, her voice hollow with shock. "For how long?" The answer apparently wasn't encouraging, because she hung up and immediately called her mentor from graduate school, desperately seeking advice on how to handle accusations of making false harassment claims against a superior. By the time we pulled into our driveway, Emma had received calls from 3 different HR representatives, 2 department colleagues expressing their disappointment, and a terse message from Victoria's assistant scheduling a formal meeting to discuss her inappropriate workplace behavior and false accusations against executive leadership. The professional consequences were mounting faster than Emma could process them, and I found myself in the surreal position of watching my wife realize that her career was effectively over because she couldn't handle seeing another woman show interest in the husband she'd been taking for granted. "Jason, you have to help me," she said the moment we got inside, her professional composure completely shattered. "Victoria likes you, obviously. Maybe you could talk to her, explain that I was just upset and didn't mean what I said." The irony was staggering. After spending years minimizing my professional worth and treating me like an embarrassing secret, Emma was now begging me to use my newfound connection with her boss to save the career she'd just destroyed through jealousy. "Help you how exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about what she expected me to do after watching her publicly humiliate both of us. "Tell her I'm not usually like this, that the harassment accusation was just heat of the moment jealousy, that I respect her leadership and would never intentionally undermine her authority." Emma was pacing our living room like a caged animal, her mind racing through damage control scenarios that all seemed to hinge on my willingness to advocate for her. I sat down on our couch and really looked at my wife for the first time in months, seeing not the confident researcher who commanded respect in her professional circles, but a desperate woman who'd miscalculated so badly that she was now dependent on the husband she'd been systematically devaluing. "Emma, you accused a vice president of sexual harassment in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. You called her a desperate cougar and a predator. You made false accusations that could have destroyed her career if there wasn't video evidence contradicting your claims." The reality of what she'd done was finally sinking in as I laid out the magnitude of her professional suicide. "But you could explain that I was just protecting our marriage, that any wife would react that way to seeing her husband being seduced by another woman." She was still trying to justify her behavior instead of acknowledging how inappropriate and career-ending it had been. "Protecting our marriage?" I asked, feeling something shift inside me as I processed her words. "When was the last time you protected anything about our marriage, Emma? When was the last time you introduced me as something more than just your husband? When was the last time you showed interest in my work or treated me like someone you were proud to be with?" The questions hung in the air between us, and I watched Emma realize that she was asking me to save her from the consequences of treating me poorly for years, using a connection she'd never wanted me to have with a woman she'd never allowed me to be impressive enough to attract. 3 days later, I found myself in Victoria's corner office overlooking downtown Chicago, ostensibly there to discuss the logistics consulting contract she'd mentioned, but we both knew this meeting was about much more than supply chain optimization. Her office was everything I'd expected: floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of understated luxury that screamed executive power without being ostentatious about it. Victoria was wearing a navy blue suit that fit her perfectly, and she moved around the office with the confident grace of someone completely comfortable in positions of authority. "I'm glad you called," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing her massive mahogany desk. After Saturday night's drama, I wasn't sure if you'd want to pursue our business discussion. I settled into the chair, noting the quality of everything in her office and feeling like I was finally in a room where my professional success was assumed rather than questioned. The consulting opportunity interests me, regardless of what happened with Emma. Victoria smiled, pulling out a folder thick with contracts and financial projections. Good, because what I'm offering is substantial. We're talking about a 3-year exclusive contract to overhaul our entire Midwest distribution network, with performance bonuses that could double your current annual income. She slid the documents across her desk, and I found myself looking at numbers that represented more money than I'd ever imagined making from a single client relationship. The scope of the project was enormous, coordinating supply chains for 17 manufacturing facilities, implementing cutting-edge inventory management systems, and establishing distribution partnerships that would revolutionize how their products reached market. This is incredible, I said, scanning the technical requirements and realizing this was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been hoping for my entire career. But I have to ask, is this legitimate business, or are you offering this because of what's happening with Emma? Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming more serious. Jason, I don't mix business with personal feelings. This contract exists because our current logistics partner is costing us millions annually through inefficiency, and your expertise is exactly what we need to solve those problems. She paused, studying my face. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping this would give us opportunities to work closely together. The honesty was refreshing after years of Emma's passive-aggressive communication style, and I felt something stir in my chest that had nothing to do with professional advancement and everything to do with being pursued by someone who saw my value clearly. What kind of opportunities? Victoria stood up and walked around her desk, leaning against the edge in a way that put her directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. The kind where we build something together, professionally and personally. Where your intelligence is appreciated instead of minimized. Where your success enhances mine instead of threatening it. Her hand moved to rest on my shoulder, the same gesture that had sent Emma into her jealous spiral, but this time there were no witnesses except us. Emma doesn't deserve you, Jason. She spent years making you smaller to make herself feel bigger, and that's not what love looks like. The observation hit home because it perfectly captured what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. That Emma's treatment of me wasn't supportive partnership but systematic diminishment designed to manage her own insecurities. Victoria, this is moving very fast, I said, though I made no effort to move away from her touch. Is it though? Or have you just been moving slowly for so long that normal pace feels rushed? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something more intimate. I know what I want, Jason. I want a partner who challenges me intellectually, who's built something substantial with his own hands, who doesn't need to tear others down to feel successful. Her thumb traced along my jawline, and I felt desire I hadn't experienced in years, not just physical attraction, but the intoxicating sensation of being truly wanted by someone operating at the highest levels of achievement. What about Emma? The investigation, her career? Victoria's smile was confident and slightly predatory. Emma made her choices on Saturday night. The investigation will conclude that she made false harassment accusations against a superior, displayed unprofessional conduct at a company event, and showed concerning judgment issues that raise questions about her fitness for her position. The clinical assessment of Emma's professional death sentence should have bothered me more than it did, but I found myself feeling oddly detached from my wife's consequences. And then, Victoria's hand moved to the back of my neck, her fingers playing with my hair in a way that sent electricity down my spine. Then you and I build something extraordinary together. A business partnership that revolutionizes pharmaceutical logistics, and a personal relationship between equals who appreciate each other's success. She leaned down until her lips were inches from mine. I have a penthouse apartment 20 minutes from here. We could continue this conversation somewhere more private. Discuss the finer points of our potential partnership. The invitation was clear, and I realized I was at a crossroads that would determine the rest of my life. Stay loyal to a woman who'd spent years making me feel inadequate, or step into a relationship with someone who saw me as an asset worth pursuing? 6 months later, I'm standing beside Victoria at the annual Pharmaceutical Innovation Summit in Boston, wearing a custom-tailored suit that actually fits me properly and watching her introduce me to industry leaders as her brilliant partner in both business and life. The transformation in my circumstances is so complete that sometimes I have to remind myself this is actually my reality now, not some elaborate fantasy I've constructed to escape the diminishment I'd accepted as normal in my marriage with Emma. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Jason Mitchell, the logistics genius who's revolutionized our distribution networks and saved our company over $12 million in operational costs this year alone. Victoria announces to a group of pharmaceutical executives, her hand resting proudly on my arm in the same gesture that had triggered Emma's career-ending meltdown. The difference in how Victoria presents me versus how Emma used to dismiss me is so stark it's almost comical, where Emma would introduce me as, "just my husband," with apologetic undertones. Victoria showcases my achievements like trophies she's genuinely excited to display. My consulting firm has tripled in size since partnering with Victoria's company, and we've expanded into medical device distribution and biotechnology logistics, making me one of the most sought-after specialists in pharmaceutical supply chain management. The contract Victoria offered wasn't just legitimate. It was the launching pad for the kind of professional success I'd always known I was capable of but had never been encouraged to pursue while married to someone who saw my achievements as threats to her own identity. Victoria and I moved in together 3 months ago, and living with someone who celebrates my success instead of minimizing it has been like discovering I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. She asks detailed questions about my projects, brainstorms solutions to complex logistical challenges, and treats my professional insights like valuable contributions to conversations rather than interruptions to be managed. The Portland facility expansion is ahead of schedule because of Jason's innovative inventory staging approach, she tells a group of investors over dinner, beaming at me with genuine pride. His efficiency improvements are going to be the model for our entire West Coast operation. I find myself sitting up straighter, speaking with more confidence, taking up space in conversations the way successful people do when they're not constantly being made to feel like they should apologize for their expertise. Emma's divorce settlement was finalized last month, and she ended up with significantly less than she'd expected because my income had increased so dramatically during our separation that the asset division favored me heavily. Her career never recovered from the harassment accusation incident. She was transferred to a small research facility in Wisconsin after completing mandatory sensitivity training and accepting a formal reprimand that will follow her for the rest of her professional life. Through mutual friends, I heard she struggled to find her footing in the smaller facility, where her previous status as a rising research star means nothing and her reputation as someone who makes false accusations against superiors has preceded her. She keeps asking people if you ever mention her, Dr. Peterson told me at a conference last month, shaking his head with obvious disapproval. Keeps talking about how you two had something special and she made one mistake that destroyed everything. The characterization of her years of systematic dismissal and final public breakdown as one mistake shows she still doesn't understand what actually went wrong, but I find myself feeling only distant sympathy for someone who had everything she needed and threw it away because she couldn't recognize its value. Victoria and I are planning our engagement announcement for next month's industry gala, the same event where Emma humiliated both of us exactly 1 year ago, and the symmetry feels like the universe's way of underlining how completely my life has transformed. Are you nervous about seeing Emma's former colleagues again? Victoria asked last night as we reviewed the guest list for the gala. Not nervous, I replied, pulling her closer on our penthouse balcony overlooking the city lights. Grateful. If she hadn't shown everyone exactly who she was that night, I might have stayed in a relationship where I was constantly made to feel inadequate instead of finding someone who sees my worth clearly. Victoria smiled and kissed me with the passion of someone who'd never doubted that I was worth pursuing, worth celebrating, worth building a life around. Their loss is definitely my gain, she murmured against my lips, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt like someone's prize instead of their burden. Emma tried reaching out through LinkedIn 2 weeks ago with a message about closure, and understanding what went wrong, but I deleted it without responding because some chapters of life are better left permanently closed. I've built something extraordinary with Victoria, a business empire that's reshaping pharmaceutical logistics and a personal relationship based on mutual admiration rather than one-sided accommodation, and looking backward serves no purpose when the future holds this much promise. Tomorrow we're announcing our expansion into European markets, and Victoria's introducing me to potential partners as the strategic mind behind our international growth plans. The man who used to be dismissed as just a husband is now being courted by Fortune 500 companies and treated like the industry expert I always knew I could be, and the best part is sharing that success with someone who never doubted it was possible.